Hello, welcome to this video. This video is going to be called The Colour of Genius. Does genius have a colour? What colour would it be? When you get these people with synesthesia, don't they? And they hear notes, and when they hear the notes, they see a colour. So what colour would genius be? Golden? What would it be? I don't know. Originally, I wanted to do a video on Louis Armstrong. And I wanted to get into his early years, right at the beginning of jazz history. And I wanted to really try and explain to a modern audience what is so genius about Louis Armstrong, to the point where I wanted to try and get across the fact that this may be the greatest musical genius of the 20th century. And this may be the genius whose genius ideas, which is basically, I always classify a genius as someone who is able to think into the future and come up with stuff that's not competent or great, but actually is futuristic, that changes the rule books. I don't think there's anybody in music history, in recent music history, that's influenced popular music or experimental music, jazz, blues, funk, reggae, soul. There's nobody equal to Louis Armstrong. I wanted to try and get that across, but I knew that once I started to discuss that, I will be starting from a certain point of view, which certain people will find offensive. And so I know it's going to be hard for me to step around that. So 3 or 4 years ago, whenever it was, when I started this channel up, I came on and I thought, this is my channel, you know, it's a free country, I can say what I want. And it's all my opinion, you know, I don't come on here saying that what I'm saying is the law of Andy, you know, the word of Andy, and it has to be true. It's just my opinion. I just wanted to stir the pot of ideas, get people fired up, you know, inspired, you know, maybe a bit annoyed, again, just get people talking, thinking about music, because it's very important that we do, you know, just to keep it going, to save music, we need to be fired up by it. And so I came on here and I realised that certain opinions were, it was as though there was a whole bunch of people out there, and they were a bit like witch finders, and they could tell if you were a witch if you said certain words. So I decided to do a video on the origin of the word woke, and I thought it was very interesting to go back to Lead Belly's song in the 1930s, that he, you know, the Scottsboro Boys, and the whole story of that, and how he used that word and what it meant, and then how it's gone through history. And there was a whole bunch of people that me using the word, it was like witch, witch. Which you use the word woke, that's used by the right wing, it's used by them to put across right wing talking points, and this thing just emerges on there. Oh god, you know. And then you find, if you use the word identity politics or social justice or any of these words, people, witch, you're a witch, straight off. But it's the words themselves, because these words have been embodied, they're like magic, they've been incanted, you know, the right wing have come along and embodied some sort of evil thought process, and this has taken over my brain. My brain's addled by it, and they've spotted it. And some of them are trying to be kind. Andy, I know you're not like this, but what you're saying really sounds like so and so, blah blah. And then other people, it's just literally like, you are a racist, you are a this, you are a that, you know. So I then dug in deep. Being me, I dug in deep, and caused all sorts of trouble. But I feel a little bit censored when it comes to this, to talking about the origins of jazz. And it's got nothing to do because I want to make an argument that jazz is black music or white music. It's nothing to do with that. It's the fact that I want to make certain points, and certain points that I want to make will not make sense if you do believe that, you know, jazz is the great black American art form. Now, I'm trying to, even now, I'm trying not to set those people that are like, you know, the arbiters of morals that are out there, that believe that they've been put there by God or whoever to you know, tell me what's right or wrong and explode if I say the wrong things, you know. I am aware of them. Right, so 2 things have happened in the sort of research into this video on Louis Armstrong. First of all, I was trying to find out something about he had no kids, and I was trying to find, but he did have an adopted child, and the adopted child had brain damage, and he looked after the adopted child all his life. And I was trying to find out about that, and I came across this website, which has formed the thumbnail to this video. So here is the background of this thumbnail is the website I went to. I can't remember the name of the website, but that's there. You're looking at it, right? And you could see it said, all music is black music. They're stated massive big letters. Now I've added the question mark there because that is what I do. Is it? And straight away I think, well, it probably is, because we've all evolved from, you know, people from Africa. We're all, aren't we? We're all from Africa, so all music does go back to African music. Yeah, fair enough. All music is black music. But doesn't that undermine the point they're trying to make? Because then they got loads of photographs that are of people who are black. So shouldn't it be loads of pictures of everybody? And I don't know. But so this seems a little bit racist if they're doing that. But of course, it can't be racist because black people aren't racist, are they? You know, you're in that sort of that way of thinking. And I thought, I just want to try and find this thing out. I want to know about Louis Armstrong. You know, I'm not interested with he's black or not. I'm interested in the fact that he looked after this kid. You know, that's the whole of his life, and the fact that, you know, the woman that he married, his first wife, was a prostitute, and she'd got this. She had sort of adopted this kid because it was the relative of theirs, and Louis took him in because Louis seems remarkable for genius musicians, that he has this incredible, positive, beautiful energy of just love. And I think that's an incredible thing, love of the whole world. And that's what's in his music. And that's rare. I wanted to make that point. All right? But now I'm getting told that all music is black music. Then I ended up seeing this video on YouTube, which was an interview with Justin Bateman. Now, Justin Bateman was one of the kids in the American show Family Ties, which I know was the series that launched Michael J. Fox. But being a British person, I have no idea what this is. If it was Grain Chill or something, I would know where I'm at. But I'm sure the Americans will know who Justin Bateman is. Anyway, I saw this interview with Justin Bateman.
There's a promise in the air where people are expecting major change, and you're kind of on the edge of your seat because you don't know how it's going to happen or when it's going to happen, but people expect it to happen. Are you feeling that too?
Yeah, for the last 4 years, very acutely, and I know it preceded these 4 years as well, but there's been kind of a pressing down and kind of limiting what people can say. And what happens too is you limit what can even occur in society. And so there's been a stagnation. Things haven't been moving forward in the arts, in philosophy, in politics, in medicine, in anything. And I don't mean technically did things, you know, were there technological advances or anything like that. I mean innovation, like with your thoughts, with what is coming into your spirit from God, magic, the universe, whatever you want to call it. That's been stagnated for at least 4 years. And now that's changed. And that's what I'm really excited about. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time.
It's a brilliant observation. And I've noticed it too, that culture is stuck. They keep making repeats of every movie. Every TV show's a repeat. There's no creativity in Hollywood, in literature, in the arts. As you mentioned, you've noticed it more than anybody, I'm sure.
And what struck me about that was she seems a quiet person, in a way introverted, creative person. And creative people I recognise. I know I come out here and I'm all bolshy and shouty, but I'm actually quite shy, really. I've learnt to put a front on. And I understand that. I have a feeling for it. So I can see where she's coming from. And in that interview, she expresses something that I feel that there is something there, whether you like it or not. There is something that is out there culturally. It's been there for a while now. I'd say it's been here since around about 2010. And this puts limits on what you should think. It puts limits on what you should feel. It puts limits on your creativity. And this stifles the creative flow. And what this has done has ground our culture to a halt. You know, the culture is no longer moving forward. There are no new ideas. There's no new nothing, and you see it right across the board. And everyone feels that this emptiness is there. And then when you're on the other end of it, like me, and you've got a channel like this, and you start to talk, you become aware that that's there. It's really there. And then you get people ringing up saying, "Really watch what you say." Now you got to remember, I'm broadcasting from the United Kingdom. And at the moment, the United Kingdom is being seen by the free world as really impinging on free speech, that there's some terrible things going on here. I have come off Facebook because my complaint about the challenges to free speech here in the UK have caused such a stink. I thought it's just not worth it. I mean, I've deleted the whole lot, 3,000 people, all the videos, everything's gone. Because I don't really want to be on the end of that amount of hate, because people do not understand that if I'm championing free speech, that means that people can say what they want, however horrible it is. And then going through all those ideas and trying to sort out the wheat from the chaff is what you need to do to create these new ideas. And when you return to Louis Armstrong, it's a very interesting thing, this is. And this is what I want to talk about on this video. But as I talk about this, I do want to bring in these underlying themes that I've opened up in the first 10 minutes. So I go back to this question again. What is the colour of genius? Does it have a colour? I don't think it does it? Only real things have a colour. When you say that something has a colour, like say anger is red, anger doesn't really have that colour. It's an aesthetic response to the world. It's not a material response to the world. You can't make material, empirical, rational judgments based upon aesthetic feelings. You just can't do it. Anger is not red. It's not. There's, I can't point to it. There's some anger there. What colour is it? It's red. Now, okay, now we can get into people's perception. What is red? Your red might be different to mine, but that is not the point I am trying to make here. What I'm saying is that actual things have a colour, and once you go beyond that and start to say that, music genres have a colour, or certain cultures have a colour, that colour is metaphorical. It's aesthetic. That's what we're doing there, and there has to be some idea of essentialism attached to that. And so the category that you're describing in that way, you're embodying with these essentialist qualities. So, an essentialist quality would be like water is wet, fire is hot, right? They do have those essential qualities, right? But if you say that, I don't know, an apple is embodied with knowledge, it's not. It's not an essential quality of the apple. It's something that we put onto it culturally. Now, Louis Armstrong's interesting because at the beginning of the 20th century in America's finding its feet, and it's making all sorts of terrible mistakes, but it's also doing lots of positive things, and it's slowly going to become the most powerful country on the planet. And I feel like going, hurrah, America's the most powerful country on the planet because they have democracy and they have freedom of speech. I know they don't get it right, but they still have those qualities in there. Now, these aren't essentialist qualities. America hasn't really got those. It's something I put on. It's what we put onto that. It's something that we feel. That's the thing that I'm putting onto it. But that idea we're putting onto it has, if we see it like that, I'm so happy that it was not Russia that ended up, Soviet Russia ended up being the most powerful country in the world, because I don't want to live there. I want to live in this place like America or the UK. That's what I want to do, because it seems like we have more freedom to do what we do, and there's downsides to that. I'm sure these totalitarian countries have a lot less crime than we do, but that's some of the things you pay. That's what you pay for when you allow people to be free. So America's finding its feet at the beginning of the 20th century, and it's looking around. And the thing is that, like many countries that have been newly formed, unlike the United Kingdom here, you then try and say, well, what is our culture? And the great mythic thing that's created in the United States of America is cowboys and Indians. It's the Western, right? And in 1903, when the Great Train Robbery comes out, and that cinema is born, and Hollywood then becomes that's the big new art form that's created by America. This is the first great one, 1903. And then a few years later, the recording industry emerges, but the recording industry is really immersed in European music forms. It's operetta and classical music, stuff like that. And but the people enjoy novelty records, and a company in New York decides to record the original Dixieland Jazz Band in 1917, and they put this record out, which they think is going to be a novelty record. It's this band making farmyard animal noises, and it'll make people laugh. They might sell a few copies, but it sells millions and millions of copies because there's something on there that people really respond to. It hits the time, right? And this is an American form of music, right? And so what happens at that point in jazz is the word jazz, the word blues, the idea of recording jazz, the idea of pumping some money in and getting those records out and pushing it, all that's a commercial thing. We have jazz because of capitalism. We have jazz because of commerciality. All right? And once there's some money there, once there's some money to be made, those free capitalist market forces, they start to search out where the genius is. Where's the genius? And what's interesting at that point culturally, Americans going, we haven't really got a culture. Well, we've got some good composers. We've got Charles Ives here, but he did have to work, didn't he? He had to do on the nights, didn't he? We got Aaron Copland, and we've got and all this type of stuff. I know they didn't compare to Shostakovich or Stravinsky, and they're trying to find where is this Mozart? Where is it? And of course, they're looking into classical music, these European form. They don't realise what they've got on their doorstep. What they've got on their doorstep is Louis Armstrong. Now, the point I want to make here, this is the first point I want to get across to you, is that the original Dixieland Jazz Band is rubbish. It is a novelty song. If you listen to it, it's got an exciting beat and it's got some silly noises on, right? It really is just, there's no great art there, right? We could go on about jazz, and what it'll end up with here will be an argument about which race created it. Black people created jazz. Now, I know white people are involved, but black people, and then all this argument goes on. But the truth is, even in 1917, it was rubbish. It wasn't this incredible music form. Buddy Bolden wasn't doing something that was striking and incredible. It was just swingy marching music, right? And if we approach it with this modern lens, we look at jazz and we start to go, I've heard so many people saying this who are attacking me for saying, I don't think we can put a colour on this music form. And they will go, well, you don't understand, you see, because all the white New Orleans musicians, they were all classically trained and they had these high skills, But what the black New Orleans musicians, they had all feel and groove and vibe. And of course, when we go back and look at it, the bands that had like that visceral vibey thing were the spasm bands, which were white bands. And if you look at, say, James Europe, who was recording New Orleans swingy marchy music, we won't call it jazz, but we can call it that at least, in 1912, right? That is incredibly competent, because black musicians were not these idiot musicians like the lens wants us to say. James Europe, in I think about 1914, brought out a jazz, we call it jazz tune, and it was published, and it was in 5/4. This was incredibly sophisticated music. He was an incredible musician. None of these narratives make sense. And I sit there, so what are we dealing with? We've got these marches going on. Everyone's playing on these marches, right? Some of it's a bit swingy. You got the blues emerging, and it could well be the case that, good old Buddy Bolden, who we know nothing about, played the blues. Maybe he played the blues on a horn in a jazz group, but I don't believe that, for instance. I just don't believe he did. I think what he had was charisma. I think loads of people would have been doing that. The instant you do that, I can't see how it gets brought in. I can't. To me, and I've gone through it. So you go to Sidney Bechet, and he's recording, you know, a little bit later. The blues is all over it, you know. It doesn't make sense. What does make sense is that this music form, that it emerged out of marches and people are up and down and having a good time and all this, was simply just another folk form. It was a weird folk form, but there's a billions of them at that point in America. We could list them all, couldn't we? Right, around the Creole culture, around, you know, Native American cultures, or the Irish folk music, Scottish folk music, all these things are bubbling and they're mixing and creating all these folk forms. But these folk forms are pretty simplistic. The question we should be asking is, how did it become an art form? And then you go listing and you see there's Jelly Roll Morton. And Jelly Roll Morton is a little bit of a genius because he's classically trained, he's got all that, but he's also he's a bit of a naughty boy. And he's Creole, but he's quite middle class, and he sort of rebels. He's like a rock and roll. He rebels against his family, and he goes down, you know, down to all the dodgy bits in New Orleans and starts playing all that stuff. But when he's a virtuoso pianist, you listen to him play, he's incredible. He's an incredible player. But he couldn't play some of these fast boogie-woogie piano things, so he slows it down, he puts a groove in, and most importantly, he starts to arrange it. Jelly Roll Morton is very, very important in turning jazz into an art form. Right, but why does it turn into an art form? I tell you why it turns into an art form, because it's an improvised form. There's an element of groove in it, and these improvised forms, which would have been someone playing for like 15, 20 minutes, they're walking down there and going, and anyone's doing this, and they're all enjoying themselves. It's not great art. Come on, it's not great art. The reason is because the evil capitalists, they want to make some money out of it, and geniuses then pop up. Like Jelly Roll Morton. Well, if you're going to record it, how long have we got? We've got 2.5 minutes. Well, we want to pack it in. We want to tell a story. Let's paint pictures in people's minds. We're going to arrange the music. We're going to have like sound effects, voiceover. We're going to take them on a journey. Right, this is the beginning of 20th century popular music here. And Jelly Roll Morton's really important. And there's other people that are really, really, like Fletcher Henson's really important. There's real geniuses at work here. But the guy is Louis Armstrong. This natural process discovers Louis. The establishments don't do it. The people who are all moral, high-minded, they don't do it. Nobody does it. Nobody does it except these commercial forces of how can we sell more records. It's always been the case, right? And it's out there looking for this new talent that nobody knows what it is. When they signed the original Dixieland Jazz Band, nobody knows what it is. Now, I know when I mention the original Dixieland Jazz Band, what I will get is people shouting at me saying this was a white band. They copied it off of New Orleans black musicians. They came in and stole it. Now, the truth is that the original Dixieland Jazz Band was actually formed in around about 1905. And the members associated with that go back to the 1890s. And when you go back to the 1890s, you will find bands in New Orleans. They find white bands and you will find black bands. But when you look at those bands, because their racial classification was so different to ours, you will see musicians that are classified as black that nowadays we wouldn't classify as black, and vice versa. So when Papa Jack Lane was asked if there were any black people in his band, he said, no, I used to kick them out because they used to sneak in. Now, the reason they used to sneak in is because they looked white. Now, the reason they look white is because nowadays we would classify them as white, but they were classified as black. So the fact is, this melting pot was an actual melting pot. Now, something as incredible as jazz, ask yourself a simple question. Was this created by these very strict racial groups, or was it created by the fact that New Orleans was a melting pot? Right? The answer's obvious. So it creates these new forms of music. Now, I think if we go back and we listen to Buddy Bolden or Papa Jack Lane or James Europe or any of these people, and we listen to what they were playing, we would be hearing all sorts of different folk forms, which really reflect all the different cultures that are swirling around. As soon as it's recorded by the original Dixieland Jazz Band, which, remember, I have now explained history, goes back into this music at least 20 years, right? And so to say it's copied, if it was copied off black musicians, it's been copied over 20 years. And so to think that they copied and it's just a white, weak version is not true. It does not reflect what's going on. It doesn't. I'm not trying to say this as an argument to try and get white jazz in there or take anything away from black people. And I truly believe that if you wanted to break this down in terms of race, black people have the most important role in the creation of jazz. But to describe it as black music, for me, means that you stop seeing the fact that it's a negotiation and it's out of a melting pot and that all these things have come together, and it negates the very positive thing that actually in this situation in America where you had these really oppressive Jim Crow laws, that there was still integration going on, because there's something about human beings that's beautiful, and that will happen. That's that, and I think you miss that, right? So but when I listen to James Europe, if I listen to as early as we can get, I can't hear the art. But when the commercial music industry that has invented this word jazz, right? And everyone who says I don't like the word jazz because it was invented by the whites, yeah, but we just would not have it. It wouldn't be here. It would be a forgotten form of music, like a million other forgotten forms of music that we never heard, all right? It's because this is the process, because it created the motivation to find a genius like Louis Armstrong. Now, Louis Armstrong, we could say culturally, is not part of that, European classical tradition, where America's looking for the genius. Where's the genius? They're never going to look where he is, because he is from the wrong side of the tracks. He is a black American person living in a poor section of New Orleans. That's who he is. And that is so important at this point, right? And this is where, if you follow this through, I hope those of you who are waiting to go, witch, you're a witch, please follow this through. Because if you imagine there's all these music forms in New Orleans, and some of them come from the black folks, some of them come from the white folks, some from the Creole, and it's all mixtures, and it's a great big beautiful spectrum of different cultures all swilling about, but there's no real art. We're waiting for the genius to come along. And then this guy from the wrong side of the tracks, not like the James Europe that's been like classically trained, or a Jelly Roll Morton that's from like a middle class family and all that type of stuff, not a Duke Ellington. This guy lives in poverty, okay? And this guy is out in New Orleans, all right in the centre of this melting pot, right in the centre of where you've got all the prostitution and all the after hours honky tonks and all this sort of stuff. And when you look at the interviews with Louis Armstrong, you can see that's where he's from, and you can see how wonderful it is to him in a way. It was a rich tapestry of stuff. Now, this is what I find profound, and it's such a incredible thing to get your head around. At some point, I think it was New Year's Eve, probably around about 1911. I think it was New Year's Eve. It was some sort of celebration. Louis Armstrong gets his hand on a gun, right? He's 11 years old, and his mates go, why don't you go off and shoot this gun to celebrate? Now, you've got to remember that in New Orleans at the time, they had these processions that would go through New Orleans, and people would show off their guns and they'd shoot guns off and do all sorts of things, have sword fights and all this type of thing. People would get killed as well, So this kid goes out and he shoots off a gun, and because he's a little black kid in New Orleans at that time, he gets carted off, arrested. He's only 11 years old. Nobody, now you go, what the hell are you doing? And we let him off, but they didn't. They take him away from his sort of poverty-stricken, existence, and they stick him into a waif's home. And in this waif's home, this guy that is there, that runs it, he sees something in Louis Armstrong. That is the moment. The teacher sees something in this kid. Right? That guy got up in the morning and he went in and he said, that kid, I can see something there in that kid there. Nobody's looking there because it's just a waif. It's just some black kid from New Orleans, really, who does it matter? But I can see something in that human being. So he gives him a cornet. And Louis picks this up, and of course, he is the genius that the world is looking for. He's the right genius at the right time. And as soon as he plays it, the future is written. If that guy had not thought like that, if he had not had the positive aptitude that humanity does have to look at people and go, I think there's some worth there. I think that person's got something. I can see it. You know, regardless, I might see them as being some black kid, you know, and I might be a racist. I might not be. Take that away. That's a human being. I can see they got something there. Give him a trumpet. And then Louis Armstrong, he does it. Not white people, not black people, not New Orleans people. Louis Armstrong does it because he's an absolute genius. He does it. Louis Armstrong does it. He's the genius, right? And he starts playing it. And he doesn't have to try because the world needs that. The world doesn't know they need Louis Armstrong, but it does. The world needs it. Now, why the world needs it is a mystery that's so deep. And I wish I could even get near that. But at that point in time, culturally, for this country, this young country to move forward, that is what it needed. Now, it's just commercialism, isn't it? You know, no, there's a reason why everybody bought these records. It's a reason why the 1920s was called the Jazz Age. It's a reason why the music that Louis Armstrong laid down then creates the big bands so quickly, the Chicago sound, and then the swing big bands. And the swing big bands basically create American popular music, along with, you know, other strains. And by the time we get to rock and roll in the 50s, it's swing and it's a bit of blues and it's a bit of gospel and it's a bit of country music, and all that is channeling through. But all those music styles in the 1920s, they're all together. All right. There's jazz musicians playing on country records. There's country musicians influenced by jazz. But the whole thing is a melting pot. But the guy that defines it is Louis Armstrong. And then you might be thinking, what does he do? I'll tell you what he did. He put bands together, especially for recording, right? He didn't see the recording studios taking a photograph of what they were doing live. He created bands specially to go into the recording studio. They were called the Hot Fives and the Hot Sevens. And then he organised and arranged this chaotic novelty music in understanding where the expression was. And the expression was in the separating, because it was all collective improvisation, until Louis Armstrong came and said, well, we'll have a solo here and that'll be the backing here and that person will make that statement. And if you take that idea and then you embody that into a large band, that's what the big band musicians did. That's what Duke Ellington did, Fletcher Henderson did, Count Basie did, is they created organised music that had a space where the individuality of that musician, their personality, becomes part of the composition. We take this for granted now. Every single pop song is that. Every single one. It's you cannot have a pop hit without the charismatic pop star at the centre of it. That has eroded a little bit. Well, I say a little bit. It's eroded an incredible amount in recent times because we've forgotten about this. And the reason is because culturally we're moving on. But Louis Armstrong, that is what he did. It's an incredible achievement, and it was discovered by the processes, and it was him. And I think if he hadn't have been there, we may not have popular music in the form that we have it. In other words, there would be no rock music, there'd be no Led Zeppelin, there'd be no Velvet Underground, there'd be no Kraftwerk, there'd be no hip hop and rap, there would be none of it. It just would not have happened. Now, some of you are going, oh, somebody else would have done it, as though you could throw genius away like that, as though you could say, oh, yeah, there's someone else that was probably doing what Louis Armstrong. Okay, then, yeah, if you want to think that. That totally denigrates the idea of human achievement for me, and I can hear it in his music. And if somebody had come along, they may have had the genius that Louis Armstrong, but not his own specific genius, not his individual genius. When Louis Armstrong started making records in the 1920s and they were very successful, every musician, every singer, every instrumentalist had changed the way they played to sound like Louis Armstrong. Drummers played like him, right? And the same thing happened when Charlie Parker emerged in the 1940s. Everybody wanted to sound like Charlie Parker. This is what genius is. Genius isn't being the most technically brilliant player in the world, although Louis Armstrong was a virtuoso player. genius isn't knowing your theory, but Louis Armstrong knew his theory, and he could read music, and he knew his harmony, and he knew what he was doing. And the thing is that upsets me the most about this narrative that it comes at us, it's like when someone says, as we saw at the top of this video, all music is black music. Louis Armstrong's genius is because he's a black musician. There's something in his blackness that is what we hear in the essence of blackness in there. Right, and if you're a black person, then you can be proud of Louis Armstrong because he's black. His genius sort of rubs off on you. None of this is true. None of it is true. I'm afraid it doesn't. It's in the same way as Mozart and Shostakovich and Frank Zappa. Their genius does not rub off on me. I wish it did, but it doesn't. Just doesn't. All right. You have to completely reframe how you see culture, because culture, there's a jazz musician culture. Louis Armstrong and all his friends, all that era would have had a culture. The beboppers had a culture. Musicians have a culture, right? And of course, black Americans have a culture, and we can spot what those cultures are, and that's all part of it. But if it was just down to culture, we would be talking about a local music style that was just liked within that culture for cultural reasons. But what Louis Armstrong did, spoke to everybody around the whole world. He became an ambassador. He became a representative of American values, right? And he would go out. He could go out to certain countries that were on the brink of civil war. But when he arrived, so much respect there was for this gentleman that they would go, look, we're going to have to stop the civil war. Louis Armstrong's coming. This is an incredible thing. When this idea that all music is black music, when that idea starts to emerge in the 1980s, that is the point where they turn on Louis Armstrong. He starts to get called an Uncle Tom. He starts to get called, sort of like a minstrel that is doing all this, and because he was entertaining the audience. And then the apologists for Louis Armstrong start to go through, and they look at the interviews and they actually see what he did and the stance he made, and the fact that he did stand up against the racism that was going on, and he did call it out, and that actually there's a few people that probably did more for race relations than anybody else in the history of the 20th century. Because Louis Armstrong, the reason why I think he's a genius is because his achievements are so great that you start to say, why was he still having hit records in the 1960s? Why was his music still able to travel and have a hit record? Why is Hello Dolly? How did that get in the charts when it's just precisely what he was doing in the 1920s? And yet he could sing a profound song, like We've Got All the Time in the World, that type of song. He could sing that and get to #1 with that, which is one of the great pop songs. He's got what's it special about Louis Armstrong? Louis Armstrong is the first black American actor to get his name above the title in the film. He played in all these incredible films. I mean, he was treated terribly, They got the greatest musician of the 20th century usually playing some sort of house servant or something. It's disgusting. But his charisma, it won out, This guy broke down so many barriers, and those racists that were out there in America at that time that then turned up and saw Louis Armstrong not sitting there, gooning like some house servant, but as I saw him as a young kid, which is why I fell in love with him, which was when I saw the Glenn Miller story. And I recently did a video where I looked at my favourite sort of films about music and all that. I didn't put the Glenn Miller story in because the Glenn Miller story is a bit hokey, isn't it? But the one thing that's interesting is that so the reason it didn't go in there is because it means so much to me. I saw it on videotape and I used to watch it over and over again. And the bit I loved was when Glenn Miller says to his girlfriend, who doesn't know anything about jazz, he says, "We're going to go and see a genius tonight." And they go down to this club. They go into the club and Louis Armstrong's there. And Louis Armstrong, he recognises Glenn Miller. It was that famous, that point in the story. He says, "Oh, it's Glenn, come on up." And you feel proud because Louis Armstrong has bestowed that blessing onto Glenn Miller. In the story, you go, "Oh my God, yeah, because this is God." And then they start to play. and you've got Gene Krupa on stage, you've got Cozy Con, they do that drum battle, and Louis Armstrong just kills it, right? And then I saw him in High Society, and what I saw was absolute genius. It was my favourite thing. I absolutely loved it. Here I was, some kid in the 1980s, you know, it was into new wave of British heavy metal, but I loved him. I loved his playing, I loved his singing, I loved his charisma, I loved everything that he represented. And the reason I loved it is because what I recognised, and I didn't know this, is that he was beaming out love. And so I'm thinking, you know, is there any evidence? When we look at his life, you start to see it. You start to see that then when you watch the interviews, you could see that ability to reach out. I mean, he's a comedian. He can talk to the audience and make them laugh. He's got brilliant comic timing. And then you start to see how kind he was. We're not talking about some monsters. We're not talking about the sort of pop stars that we have nowadays that we're finding out are pretty rotten. Wow, this man was a great human being. And I want to be able to tell that story. And I've tried to tell it here. And I've taken the bull by the horns. I haven't sidestepped it because I know the people who want to call me a witch will be waiting. And so I've taken that bull by the horns as well to try and tell this story. So you will look at this and go, Louis Armstrong was a genius. Full stop. What's the colour of genius? The colour of genius is Louis Armstrong. If you like this video, put a like on it. If you want to see more videos like this sort of Philosophy Saturday video, then please put a like and say you love it and all that bit. If you want to have an argument, you know, keep it kind, keep it friendly. You know, I am not trying to sow division here. I'm not trying to take any music away from anybody else. I promise you that is not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say that, you know, after 40 years of studying this and being so deeply involved in it, I'm trying to give a little bit of a different spin to put the focus on these geniuses. If you've got to the end of this video and went, oh my God, I just thought he was just this funny guy that came out in the Glenn Miller story. I knew he was a good trumpet player. I knew he was important, but I didn't realise that this is the most important genius of the 20th century in terms of music and culture. If I can get that across about this man, right, then I've done my job. If you would like to support me, you can become a Patreon, and the link is down below. You can become a free member or a paid up member, and I also have a PayPal tip jar. Hope you enjoyed this video, Philosophy Saturday. It's lovely to say it. I hope I managed to sidestep the witch hunters, and we've got to somewhere where some of you are sat there feeling positive about this lovely, positive, full of love human being, you know, whose only vice it seems that he liked a laxative. Oh, and a joint as well. See you all, bye.